moved to LA, I had confronted the ashram director's wife because she was leaving the garbage, not putting it in the thing at the right day, and it would sit there and the rats would come, and there was ivy outside and they live in the rats. And so I said to her, you have to make sure if that's your time to do that, you take it out, because we don't want the rats coming in here. And with that, I walked back in my room. We were the only two people at the ashram at the time. And I had just finished work. I worked early, so I was getting undressed to get ready for work. Going to take a shower. And I guess she stewed. I guess she wasn't used to people confronting her, and I wasn't used to not confronting people. Yeah. So all of a sudden, the door flies open, and she's standing there, hands on hips, yelling at the top of her voice. And I'm standing there naked. Now, I'll tell you, it's very difficult to argue with a woman when you're standing there naked. If you ever want to get I'm just telling you, it is. And so I stood there, tried to cover myself, and she did her thing, got through, slammed the door, and left. And that was it. A few hours later, the evening comes, and I get a call from, I think it was Sat Simran. Howdy, Jiwan? Yes, G. The Sri Singh Sahib wants to see you now. He's up at the estate. And I remember Black Krishna brought in a plate of food, which she sat down in front of me, which was made by Guru Gin. She always made good food. But I was so nervous, I swirled it around on my plate and tried to eat as much as I could and made it look like I did. Finally, the plate was done and the show was over. And he looks down at me and he says, "Isn't she fucking nuts?" I thought, here's a man who really understands the world and how that's working. He said, "Let's go to the movies, son." And I got up, he got up, we walked outside, and someone had the car. We went to the movies, and we just about went to a movie every day for 50 years thereafter. He represented himself as a king, as a king of Sikh Dharma, as a man who represented his guru in that royal fashion. Beautiful concept. In order to live that concept, he needed the accoutrements. So jewelry was one of those accoutrements. I had a mother who loved jewelry, and I'm probably the only kid on my block, or the only kid in my high school who grew up loving jewelry. I love jewelry. I love jewels. I loved my mother when she would get dressed up, and so he picked that up for me, and I had been fortunate enough to have some money and make some money, and so I had the wherewithal to purchase nice things. We had become friendly with some people in Beverly Hills. We'd go to eat at La Scala every day we were home in California, and La Scala is a very famous restaurant in Los Angeles, where all the stars and the big shots went, and they'd line up outside for hours every day to have lunch. And because of him and how he was, he had noticed that one of his students' husbands was such a big shot that he got his own place at La Scala. Nobody did. But by the time we left, we had not only our own place, it was right in the window in the front of La Scala. That's how he would maneuver. But one day we would go have lunch there at 1 o'clock. I'd pick him up, and then we'd walk down to Jerry's shop, this jewelry shop that I'm talking about, where we would sit there every day and watch the stars and the starlets, the wannabes and the bees come in, and we saw where he got all his material for teaching and how he got to learn and how he got to know that. And he'd have a seat right there, and Jerry, the owner of the shop, would have it, would be running around, and his mother would sit at a desk right behind there. And it was a family operation, and all these people would come in, and he and a couple of secretaries and I would spend a couple of hours there every afternoon. We'd get the jewels when they come in, we'd get the good deals, we'd get this, we'd get that, but that's another part of the story. But as we'd walk down every day, it was like he was the king of Beverly Hills. We'd walk down Brighton Way from La Scala and then make a left on Beverly Drive and walk past Dayton Drive and another block down to Canyon where Jerry's shop was. And as we'd walk down every day, there was 4 or 5 of us in the entourage. People would come out of their shop, all the shop owners, and Yogi, and they would wave at him, and he'd bow to him. It was a ritual that you had to see. He made a presence. But on this day, one day we were in his shop, and someone came in with a beautiful watch, and I had loved watches. My father had collected watches. It was one of the things of jewelry that a man could wear back in the day. Now I can wear anything. I wear necklaces, but back then a watch and a pinky ring or a ring was just about it. So my father loved watches and I loved watches, and I had a real propensity for them. And I guess he picked up on that because he learned to love watches. And I bought him a lot of watches. On this day, he was looking at another watch. It was a Vacheron, I think. And it was $10,000, and that's a lot of money for a watch. I'd spent more, but I spent a lot less, and usually they were less. And on this day, I don't know, I heard some bad news from my business, and I guess I was feeling insecure or whatever it is. And as he's looking over the watch and said to Jerry, we'll take it. As Jerry's packing it up, I leaned over to him. I still feel badly about it to this day. That's why I'm telling you the story. I'm not guilty, but I'm getting rid of my guilt if there's any there. I said to him, "Sir, you'll never push me beyond my capacity to match up, will you?" And rather than say, "Shut up, kid. I'm the teacher. You're the student. What the hell are you talking about? Keep your mouth shut and just follow over." And I'm big for loyalty and obedience, so don't get me down. That's why I'm here. And don't get me wrong. And rather than say those nasty words to me, he looked at me so compassionately and sweetly, and he said, "Son, I never would." And man, I was so happy to write that check, and I wrote him every check everything ever since then. And let me tell you that you know how they say what you give, you get back tenfold. I got back a millionfold. I got back in my business. I got back in my life with cars and houses and jewelry. I got back in my consciousness with an elevated state of being. And I can't explain that to anybody because they won't understand. It's an experience. But I think the men here will tell you that I lived a royal life with him. Is that right, guys?
I'll tell you one thing. He was not going to tell you. I was on the East Coast, and he came and talked about this guy who inherited millions of dollars. And he said, and I took him to Jerry's shop, and this is before I even knew what it was. I took him to Beverly Hills for 40 days, and I spent his whole inheritance. You know, whether it's true or not, he's a great storyteller. I'm sure he spends a lot of money quickly when you have it. And he said, did. After 40 days, he said, he tells the story beautifully. After 40 days, he said, I spent it. And he said, and he drove over and picked me up every day, or whatever it was. And on the 41st day, he was outside waiting for me anxiously in the car to go to Jerry's. And he said, I threw my arms up at that point and I said, I can't break this man. I'm paraphrasing it, but I said, now I want to be like this guy, you know.
You know, I think the three of us shared something very similar, is that we felt it was an honor to serve him and buy things for him. You know, we paid, I paid for all his meals and this and that, and I gave him money. You can tell him how you met me the first time.
Oh, yeah.
And we all shared that. It was an honor. We loved it. It was not a deficit. It wasn't something we had to endure. It was something we loved to do, serving the master. So we all shared that, and maybe that's why he had us in the positions he did.
Well, I'm sure it is, and that story Dharma tells is the story I tell is the reason that he could tell Dharma that story, because that's how it ended. But it didn't end. Let me tell you, it never ended.
And then there was another 10, 15 years after that, and he was comfortable every day driving over. He had that one blip on the screen where he asked him if he was going to be all right, but he quickly got over it. And I never, one time, I'll tell you one story before I tell you one about Sri Mukta. I never told him no, and we spent a lot of money for 13 years. And one day I was down to just $1,000 left in my account, and I got 20,000 every Wednesday. But I had no money left, and I said, well, it's all right. I could have borrowed it from even him, but I just was nervous about it. And in the mail that day came a credit card for $1,000 that I just had to sign. And he sent me to Walmart with some Indian Sikhs. He said, buy them whatever they want. And they buy mascara, and they buy all this stuff for their wives and their girlfriends back in India. And the bill was $997. So that was the only time I almost couldn't pay for him in 13 years. And I remember now, Sri Mukta too, when I was in awe of Ari Jiwan, and I was still living in Boston, I went to winter solstice, and the Sri Singh Sam comes out of the kitchen, a huge, or he's just holding court. And he goes, I need $500. And Sri Mukta was in the back, and he raised his hand and just wrote a check for $500. I went, wow. I mean, what an honor. I said, I wish I could do that. And one day I got the opportunity, in spades.
And then we became friends after that, actually.
Yeah.
There's such a flow that moves through the city singing stuff, such a flow of inspiration, matter, energy, life force, and you're just able to be a part of that flow, channeling green energy, right? Financial energy.
He never asked once how much money I had, how my business was doing, and he always spent a lot of money, including when my inheritance came.
Twi-
But
twi-
never too much.
twice-
Never too much.
Twice he said,
Just under it. Go ahead.
twice he said, give me 25,000. I need it for something in cash. Next day he had the money. That was our last bit of money that we had in the account, but we gave it to him. They did it again about a year or two later.
All the time.
So, it was constant being back and forth, but like you said it very well, Grufata, it was a constant flow of energy back and
Yeah.
forth and up and down, in and out. And it was a precious experience. What can I tell you?
It was a protocol job, which was
Yet, we were blessed to serve him financially and otherwise. Yet, I don't know how many, every day, it's sometimes 2-3 times a day, there'd be somebody coming from the ashram here in Espanola or in LA. And we were more fortunate economically than most people to be able to accumulate some money. Most people lived hand to mouth, and that was understandable, but not desirable. And so he counseled all of these people. And I was lucky to be there when he counseled people. That was also another blessing of mine. So I saw how he did it and why he did it and what he did to do it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I can't count the thousands of times that at the end of the meeting, he would say, rather than, and they'd have to pay him like $108 or something like that. Most of them, some of them wouldn't, some of them would. But at the end of the meeting, he'd say to Soperk, give him a check for $1,008, or give him a check for $500, or give him a check for $108. And so he kept it flowing. He didn't keep it here. He kept it flowing. And that showed me that it trained me to understand that it was a flow. It wasn't, it didn't stop. Your money, Jerry used to say something interesting too as a businessman. He'd say anything that sits stinks. And that includes money.
Mhm.
So he was always trading in jewelry or whatever. That's how he made all these deals. He was very fortunate for understanding that because it made him a lot of money.
Mm.
And the Sri Singh Sahib lived that concept. He didn't let anything sit, whether it was a part of your consciousness or a dollar bill he had to spend. It was flowing all the time.
he made 500,000 a year off of tantric.
Well, I'm gonna say one.
Yeah, do you want to do that? Say, just say.
Say what?
Just say, both of us say, if you want to contact us further.
Just let him just contact me. It should be just one.
No, I
Hey,
don't
welcome, everybody.
You're not gonna say them, you just let go.
Don't tell me when.
We're back.
We're back.
All right.
Okay.
And Cal,
Hi, buddy.
Mm.
Good.
Some need to fight in order to keep the faithful interested. One of the big challenges of being a cult leader, it seems, is always having some dramatic thing going on to keep everybody stirred up. Another big reason is that management, and when I use the term management, I mean the chief Mahuff and his close circle of lieutenants who actually run the group. Management cannot be perceived as being less than invincible or less than invulnerable. If you bring the big yogi in and sit him down in the deposition room and force him to answer your questions and cross-examine him when he lies to you, and you catch him in lies, the mere fact that he has to respond to your notice, and the mere fact that he has to be there, is evidence that he does not make the world turn. And that's a political problem. I never was able to get Yogi Bhajan into a deposition in a year and a half of litigation. Every time he came up for deposition, he would have one of his followers who was a medical doctor write him a medical excuse. And the judge let him get away with that 5 times. So that he couldn't come and testify because that would be answering to another authority. Not my authority, it would be the authority of the court, but in the group it would be perceived as my authority. And now there's some question about who the chief Mahuff really is. So they fight you for that reason. The ones who leave under no circumstances can be seen to prevail. One of the things I've learned about at least those groups that I worked with is when you leave, you're defamed. He's going to die now. He's left the protection of the spiritual protection of the gurus, so he's going to be reincarnated as a cockroach, or the negative energy is going to get you now that you're out in the world, or the devil will occupy you. I'm just going down the list. You will no longer realize your full potential, and you'll be unhappy the rest of your life. Those are 4 of the ones I can think of. Well, that kind of all goes to hell if the person recovers a big money judgment against the group and walks away with cash. All of a sudden, they are powerful, and they have succeeded, and you see them in court, and they're no longer ash and gray, and they're wearing nice clothes, and people are shaking hands, and everybody's smiling. Well, management has a real problem with that. The litigation is a serious threat to their internal control. So they fight you for non-economic reasons, and that makes it hard on a lawyer. Throughout all of this, you're going to hear money talked about.
3 years, I was sitting in my office, I believe it was, and I got to the point of saying to myself, these people are crazy, these hippies. I have nothing in identity with them. I'm not this. I'm like 10 years older than most of the people that at that time were in the organization. And I didn't have much of a relationship with who they were or what they were doing. But with the Suri Singh Sahib, Yogi Bhajan, it was intimate right away. And I finally got to the point of saying, if I don't do what he's saying full time, then I believe I'm going to live my life as a sham. And I'm not willing to do that. So I left my apartment with 3 swimming pools and an indoor and outdoor tennis court and this and that, and left my parents and my friends and freaked everybody out. What are you doing? This and that. And I finally got in my car and I drove to Solstice to participate in that Solstice experience in 1974, I think so, 73, something like that. And Medgar Charn went to his training in Pomona. That he and I didn't see eye to eye about a lot of things, and so I moved to LA into Gurdev Singh, who was a Frenchman who was the grantee at that time, nice man. Moved to Phoenix later on. Now I don't know where he is. And then I met the Suri Singh Sahib. Casually, I'd go to his classes. He'd say, "Son, I hear you're doing good this night." One day, about a few months after I'd moved to LA, I had confronted the ashram director's wife because she was leaving the garbage, not putting it in the thing at the right day, and it would sit there and the rats would come, and there was ivy outside and they'd live in the rats. And so I said to her, you have to make sure if that's your time to do that, you take it out, because we don't want the rats coming in here. And with that, I walked back in my room. We were the only 2 people at the ashram at the time. And I had just finished work. I worked early, so I was getting undressed to get ready for work. Going to take a shower, and I guess she stewed. I guess she wasn't used to people confronting her, and I wasn't used to not confronting people. So all of a sudden, the door flies open, and she's standing there, hands on hips, yelling at the top of her voice, and I'm standing there naked. Now, I'll tell you, it's very difficult to argue with a woman when you're standing there naked. If you ever want to get I'm just telling you, it is. And so I stood there, tried to cover myself, and she did her thing, got through, slammed the door, and left. And that was it. A few hours later, the evening comes, and I get a call from, I think it was Sat Simran. "Howdy, Jiwan?" Yes, G. "The Suri Singh Sahib wants to see you now. He's up at the estate." I said, "Oh, okay." I put the phone down and my heart started racing. I thought I was going to get defrocked and debunked and what do they call it? Excommunicated, whatever. So with trepidation in my heart, I walked up. It's just a half a block away to the estate where Gruki, she was one of the secretaries, answered the door and showed me back into the bedroom where he was lying on the bed watching one of those nature shows on public television. And he motioned for me to sit down. So I sat down on the floor next to him, next to the bed. And he continued watching the show, and I continued watching it with fear. And I remember Black Krishna brought in plate of food, which she sat down in front of me, which was made by Garuki, and she always made good food. But I was so nervous, I swirled it around on my plate and tried to eat as much as I could and made it look like I did. Finally, the plate was done and the show was over. And he looks down at me and he says, "Isn't she fucking nuts?" I thought, here's a man who really understands the world and how that's working. He said, "Let's go to the movies, son." And I got up, he got up, we walked outside, and someone had the car. We went to the movies, and we just about went to a movie every day for 50 years thereafter. That's how I met him. How did I have the time to do all this? I was actually a working businessman. I put together low and moderate income housing to sell as tax shelters for doctors and lawyers and rich people so they could offset their income. And it worked because low and moderate income had decent housing, and the developers got a tax break. And it was very highly specific because I knew I had worked for the government for a short time, so I knew how to, as a director of development and urban renewal in St. Louis, so I knew how to play the game and the numbers with the forms and presenting them to what was called FHA at the time. Now it's the Housing and Urban Development. It used to be called FHA. And so I knew how to put these forms together so that I could market them, and I did well doing that. 1972, I think, 73, I think it was. Without asking me, the Congress of the United States revised a tax law and cut me out of business. They just took that tax loophole right out of the, I mean, they didn't ask me.
They didn't even ask you.
And so I was out of work. And I, as good it would have it, it was just at the time when I'm going through all of these changes. I'm going to yoga class. I'm studying all day long. I'm going. It was perfect. And so I had the time. I had built up some income, so I had the wherewithal, and I had the motivation, and that's how I found Yogi Bhajan.
Right.
This about the movies that we went to. He went to the movies for many reasons. For instance, American English is 90% idiomatic, so you want to learn the idioms, so there's never been no better place than the movies. Otherwise, you don't understand English, American English. But one of the big reasons he went was that it was his habit to do that. Every afternoon, he'd go to work early in India and be finished. He'd be early. By early, I mean, he might be there at 6 o'clock. And by the early afternoon, he was done. And back when he was growing up, they didn't have air conditioning in India. So it was hot as can be in Delhi. The only place that had air conditioners were the movie theaters and the hotels. So he had the habit of, after work, he'd go to the movies every afternoon to cool off until the sun went down.
Wow.
He carried it over here. It's not a big secret. That's why.
Why good?
And juxtapose that against these allegations of 7, 8 people who are all proven mentally imbalanced. And I didn't want to get into it. It's just take them, however you take them is what you get.
Let me say this about the allegations. First of all, if it matters whether he did or he didn't, you haven't reconciled it. You haven't figured it out. That comes with the turf. That I understand. But whether the allegations are true or not begs the issue. This earth will have its piece of flesh. This earth that plays by rules that we must follow, and we follow, and we have to. The heavens play by a different set of rules. And those rules we have to follow as well. But those rules have to be reconciled with the earth rules, because the earth rules have to be followed as well. So how do you do that becomes the question of of infinity, because it's the law of polarity that you solve when you understand that. But all of that I just use for a frame of reference has to be put aside, because the rule of the ether, the rule of the heavens, the rule of the guru is forgiveness. And that's not the rule of the earth, although it can be. But that rule of forgiveness, whether it's right or wrong, or it's true or not, and not if he did the allegations, you have to have the capacity to forgive. And if he didn't do the you have to have the capacity to forgive. And if he didn't do the allegations, you have to have the willingness to forgive. And if you don't understand that the reconciliation comes first through understanding, second through tolerance, first through tolerance, second through patience, third through understanding, fourth through compassion, and fifth through forgiveness. If you just skip all of that and go to forgiveness, you don't need the progression, because you're already there. You're following the guru. That's what the guru says. That's not what the law says here in the world. But the guru says time and time again, I am forgiveness. And if you want to understand the reconciliation between the heavens and the earth, you must be willing to forgive. That's all I want to say. Rightfully or wrongfully, you must have forgiveness in you. Forgiveness doesn't judge whether the issue is right or wrong, or 50% or 20%. Forgiveness is 100% forgiveness, period. That's forgiveness. All the rest is bullshit. So unless you have the capacity to forgive, you'll never reconcile this conundrum.
God will sort it out. We just have to forgive.
It starts with forgiving yourself.
That's part of it, Srimukhi. You can't forgive others unless you forgive yourself first. That's right.
Don't dump it on someone else. Like
Forgiveness belongs and begins at home. That's correct.
Right.
And
So
if
all
you have
the
a guru, you understand there's nothing to forgive. He forgives everything. So what do you have to forgive about yourself? That's why people get mad at me all the time when they say, well, don't you feel badly about this? I don't know. Oh, that's so dispassionate. That's so unforgiving. I said, no, it's not. You'll get it someday.
there's only one sin in Sikh Dharma. That's
What was this part of it? It was
Or
What
just
was the-
continue. Tell about your life with the City Sing Song.
oh yeah, okay. Well, one interesting thing with my life for the series, since I was when I got my name, and it was up in Toronto. I don't know if you're in Toronto or you're in Toronto, right? So I waited 4 months. I got to every tantric for 3 years. I flew all around the country doing the tantrics, trying to make up. I thought I'd lost 10 years of time because I got in 1980. And finally, again, I didn't sleep, but it allowed me to go up to him and get in the line and ask for my name. And I had a shmata on that was sticking straight up. I was disheveled, but I didn't know because I was so tired. And just to give an example of how he was. So I went up to him and I said, I want a name. And he shakes his head. And that shaking of head felt like millions of lifetimes I had blown it. And I was no good. I had all these chances in my life. My family gave me every chance. Everything was set up for me and I just screwed it up. But, here I am. So he says, well, what did he say? He said, he gave me the name Jiwan Singh. He did the numbers and he said, you have till you're 33 to get your divinity. Otherwise, forget it. And that forget it was as loud as the universe's resound. And yet it was like him turning a stereo up from 1 to 10 to 1/2. He had 9.5 more to go. And I was shattered.
How old were you?
I was 28.
Okay.
And I had that 10-year gap where I just floated around after playing sports and, not getting any degree, not doing anything. And finally I was getting direction, but it wasn't my parents' type of direction, but I was pretty comfortable with it. But it's another step. But I go up to the guy that's running it and I'm said, and he says, get your divinity by the time you're 33, otherwise forget it. And I can't tell you, I felt my aura go to 0. And I read all this stuff and I heard about auras getting shattered. And he shattered. There was no protection. I was nude. I was naked. I was exposed. He just shattered me in 1 second. And I looked at him and I didn't say, what do I got to do this time? I just looked at him and all of a sudden in my mind, I go, screw it. I'm going to do it. I could do it or not do it. I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do my best. And if I don't, I don't. All of a sudden, my aura goes to 9 feet. And again, I've never seen this before and never again. Yellow, golden, 9-foot aura, like he talked about, I'd read about. And gurus and holy books floating through the thing. And peace. And everything. And 5 seconds, I blink my eyes and I look at him. I'm like, and he winks his eye at me and he goes, next. That was 30 seconds of his time. He started and he finished. And he had a line of people, in addition to everything he did for everybody in Toronto and everywhere in the world. In 30 seconds, he took me from showing me how easy I could be totaled to what it was that I wanted. And boy, I wanted door number 2. So actually, I'm going to go into that. So talking about responsibility here and that kind of stuff. So I moved here in 1990 and he wanted me to do this big business with these 5 big business people. We weren't big business people. We had big egos, but we thought we were big business people. And all of us were free falling all at once. We were all going bankrupt. But we argued amongst ourselves instead of doing business. So I got pissed off and I said, this isn't business to him. This is bullshit. And, but he had to back the people that he was backing, Prem and Karimjit. And I was the odd person out, but I wasn't helping either. And I won't tell the story about it on the lawn, but let's say a year later, I had to quit. And I told him, I can't do this anymore. I've spent $250,000 trying to build this business for you. And I'm out of money. I got to get a real job. And that hurt me so bad. I said, I got to get a real job. I was telling him, it's the worst I ever talked to him. And he calls Daya up and he says, a call security, Daya, because you have anything from him to call security. And I was like, ugh. But that didn't pan out, luckily. So a year and a half later, I started working with Siri Mukta. I went bankrupt. I had a new baby. All the money I had saved for my real good business, but I lost a lot of money and I spent it on that business. And I said, instead of saying, what's wrong with him? I said, what's wrong with me? Why did this happen? Why did I fail when I moved out here? And I meditated and I went to sadhana every day. I took my daughter every day. And finally, one day I had an epiphany. I didn't take charge. I picked at these people instead of doing what I needed to do to lead. And it didn't solve everything. But I finally got the answer. I got to take responsibility of my life. I got to take charge. I stop picking at, my father outside of me or whatever. And immediately, this is 1992 and a half, early 93, I go over to the ranch, and he had been shunning me for that year and a half, just looking at me and shaking his head like he did when I got my name. And there were 7 drivers of him, one person every day in the ashram. And he said, drive me. So I had a Lincoln Continental at the time, and I pick him up. The first time I picked him up, I inhaled real well, but I couldn't exhale. I was that nervous. I was just, what am I doing? Why me? And being the athlete I am, I said, why not me? I said, I looked around and I said, okay, he picked me. That's good enough for me. I have no idea how I got here, but here we go out the driveway. And I got past the rhinoceros successfully. I drove out, stayed in the right lane. We went into Santa Fe. And that was the beginning of, there was another driver, and I drove 4 days a week, and he drove 3 for the next 4 months. And then he said, that driver out, Dharma drives me every day for the rest of my life. So that's what happened to me. And I got real, went from, he said, Dharma used to pee in his pants when he saw me. And now he's totally comfortable with me. And I was comfortable, total respect for him. But we sat in the car and went everywhere, and we sat in the house all the time. Oh no, the first year I didn't get in. He had me sit out by the washer and dryer for a year. I listened to that washer and dryer, boom, 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 and I saw these people go in and sit with them, and I was like, so and they finally invited me in after a year, and then I was in from that on. And my marriage wasn't very good, so Sri Mukta, Hari Jiwan, and I was to report to lunch at 1 o'clock every day, and we could stay as long as we wanted. But I didn't have a great marriage, so I stayed all night till like 3 in the morning because I couldn't believe he wanted me around, and I just wanted to watch how he did things and everything. So I saw a lot. And it's because I wanted to soak it up. It's just how my life went. And we went around the world. We sat around. There's much more sitting around and watching TV and watching him have appointments. All of us did intimate appointments. With dignitaries, we met the biggest people in the world. We met the biggest yogis and swamis in the world. We stayed in luxury 5-star places, and we stayed in hovels. It was just beautiful. I don't know. We served him all the time. Whatever he needed, we were Musketeers. I would have jumped in front of anybody for him, but it didn't go that way. He knew how to navigate and do his job and drop the teachings. And that was my job, was to get him to class, really. The rest was just beautiful, was being with him and getting to watch him do stuff for some reason. Hopefully I can share that with people over time. So that's story number 2.
Yeah, here in Toronto, I never had the privilege of actually sitting with him when he did the counseling. We had the head of the ashram, and he was privileged to be there for that. And he absorbed all that, and then he freaked out. So we lost that here in Toronto, but
he just started coming to the East Coast.
You have to organize your memories and anonymize them so nobody is exposed. You don't want to say, well, he said this with Clinton and he said this with so and so and blah. But you can anonymize it. So his technique, his technology, his methodology, example.
That's what I agree. That's very good. That's what I will do. I can protect the innocent. A male can become a female who lived in Europe, not America. I'm not that smart, but I'm smart enough to, I think, do that's why he had me around him, I hope. And
you tend to procrastinate?
He was my friend. He was a teacher's my friend, but in the end, he wasn't. Everything he did was for me. When I look back at it, he was totally personable with me. Totally personable all the time, but it was always for my upliftment in the end, not just for his aggrandizement. You know, if it was, that was fine too. Maybe it was sometimes,
Maybe.
but as far as I could tell, it was all I was serving him. It was
Very good.
beautiful.
You were the host of a very special guest who used to be the Secretary General. Anything you want to talk about?
I hosted Manjit Singh. There was the head of the.
No. From Secretary General of the Khalsa Council. Remember that lady?
Oh, I hosted her. She lived in my
You
house.
hosted her?
Oh, it was he was ours. I took her out every day, and she
Took
lived
her out.
here for a year.
A lot of her.
3
And
years.
I didn't even get into her book.
We were
Wait,
dating.
I can't hear everything. What was the question?
Oh, you don't have to really get into it, but if you're interested, you want to say 2 words about that experience, go ahead.
Siri Singh Sabha often put people to live with us. Hari Jiwan had many people the early years. Nice people, not nice people. We just took them in, and he put Premkin with me when she lived. She came back, you know, I don't know the dates, in the 90s to try to reconcile with him. She spent about 3 years here, and for about a year she lived at my house. And I didn't have much to do with her. You know, I was polite to her. She was polite to me. You know, I don't want to slander her or say anything negative, but you know, there were a few inappropriate things she did, but I let it go. And but it was polite. She was very polite, you know, and we didn't talk about anything about allegations or any of that stuff. And my job was just to host her and be kind and compassionate as much as I could. And that was it, because he put her there. So I'm going to make sure that I take care of her.
You're right in a way. What happened with me was she worked with me at Ancient Healing Ways for a year. For the first 2 years, we went into Santa Fe for a year and a half, and we wined and dined her every night. And she was with this whole group of Wiccans, and they're women that is a strange group.
What they call them?
The goddesses, they call
The
themselves.
goddesses, right?
And we took out 60 people a night to the El Dorado, 13 out of 14 nights. We'd drive her places. She'd almost admit this, that. And I thought, I can't say, but I was in meetings that almost stuff happened. But I'll say one thing. She was very graceful. She didn't, but it was like there was a plexiglass shield around the Dharma, and she was knocking on the window, and she couldn't get in. And she wanted to get in, but she didn't want to do the discipline. And she didn't want to do the discipline. And she was so smart. She was 2 degrees off from understanding the Guru perfectly, everything, but she had this agenda she couldn't beat that I'm not a psychologist, nor do I want to go into it. But she was actually very graceful, but she's sneaky a little bit in terms of she wanted her position back, it looked like, in the end, and she couldn't wait it out. And after 3 years, she said, my karma's done, and I've worked it out with him. And boom, she was gone a day later. And Hari Jiwan came in. I was the head of Ancient Healing Ways, but he put him above me for about 3 or 4 months, so he can talk to about that and whatever else he wants to say about that experience.
Very good.
No, I don't want to say anything about that experience,
Yeah.
but I'll answer your question for you. Your question was, how do I feel about the pictures coming down? I am chief of protocol, so I view everything through that window. And that means that it's not how I feel about anything that matters. I have to take my feelings out of it entirely. I feel terribly about it, personally. But I judge everything on whether it's a protocol, a tradition, a ritual, or something else. And if it's a protocol, then there's no doubt it has to stay, because the protocol comes from the Guru, and the Guru is infinite. You don't mess with that. That was true, is true, and shall always be true. If you don't believe that, you better find a different discipline, because that's what we're about. So protocol doesn't change in my mind, and I'm struggling with some of the things now, like gay marriages, for instance. I'm not struggling. I'm just waiting to see what comes to me. I got a lot of things figured out. That one, I'm leaning one way, but I'm listening to everybody on that still. But the point is that I judge everything through that window. And his pictures are not protocol. His pictures are tradition. They're not structured by the Guru that Yogi Bhajan's picture should be here, or that even the Guru's picture should be here. None of that is part of our protocol. It's part of our tradition. So as much as I don't like it, I accept it, because it's not against the protocol, not against the rules. So it's a little different than most people. And if the Sangat decides they don't want a picture of Yogi Ji here or there, I may argue and fight against it, but until they decide they want it, they have the right to not want it, because it's a tradition. I hate it. I don't like it. Shouldn't use the word hate, but you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
But I don't have a choice.
Yeah.
So that's how I deal with it.
Say one last thing about Premka that I think is important for the record. In those 3 years, we went out with her 13 out of 14 nights a week. So he put energy into her, all the energy he puts into you when you meet him. It happened again. It wasn't a happenstance, quick meeting. It was 3 years of intensive, serious things, of spending a lot of the energy he had left on the planet interacting with her. And I got the experience of doing that too, being next to him the whole time. And he was beautiful. He really just showed his class.
Very good. Very good. So let's leave that subject. Let's talk about, I'm looking for stories, because, I'm still thinking of doing another edition of the biography that he set me up to do. So there's already one edition, like it's a second edition now, but I'm gathering more stories for the next edition. Anybody got some jewels? I'm sure you do. Who wants to go first?
Let's see. All right, I'll tell you a story. If I get emotional, I apologize beforehand. A few years before he died, I used to complain to him about the people who ran the businesses and his staff. I used to always complain to him. He used to yell at me. So I did it again a couple of years before he died. I couldn't hold myself in. They were sabotaging him. One of the heads of the businesses did give him the right information, purposely hid it from him. I was pissed off. So I came to him expecting he was going to yell at me again. And I started crying in front of him. I said, they're gonna, give me a second. They're going to destroy everything, I said. After you die, they're going to destroy it. And he started crying. And he said to me, son, we have to do what we have to do and let God do what he has to do. That's the story. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now you got me tearing up.
One time when he was very sick, a few years before he passed, I walked over to the dome a little early, and nobody was in his room, and he was sitting on the edge of his bed, kind of rocking in pain, and I felt so badly for him. I climbed on the bed and went over to him and started massaging his shoulders, and that wasn't my job. I didn't massage his feet or his shoulders or do that kind of personal work for him. He had plenty of people that did that. They loved to do it, and that wasn't my position. But I just wanted to do whatever I could to make him feel better. So I started massaging his shoulders, and thinking I'd make him feel better, I said something like, you know, sir, you don't have to keep hanging around this planet. We're set. We'll take care of everything. Little did I know what a fool I was. You don't have to go through this pain. He said, shut up. You know how you do that? Shut up. And I said, what? I could be wrong again? What? Well, like I'm going to hear it again. He said, that's not why I'm going through this. And I said, why are you going through this, sir? He said, son, I've taught so much in my life, and I've hoped and prayed and cajoled and kicked people to do what they couldn't. And sometimes I did it when I shouldn't have, because it's not the job of a teacher to push a student beyond his capacity. And I'm paying that karma off for this now. It was out of my compassion I did it, he said, but still I have to pay it off. And I thought to myself right then that, and I still think to this day, that anybody who wants to doubt him, if they could just see, and this is just one conversation, one day in thousands of days, tens of thousands. And this is, if they could just see his sensitivity in not only understanding his position, but understanding why his position is what it is, you can understand that he was not your ordinary Joe. Not at all.
Yes. About 7, 8 years of driving him, one day in the dome, he said to me, "You've served me perfectly for 7 years without flaw." And in my mind, I go, "Yeah, sure, you're buttering me up." And he says, "But you've never asked me a question." And I thought about it, and I didn't ask another question. And 4 years later, I was alone with him in the dome in tremendous pain, but not at all. I was still in the bliss. The worst things happened to me. It was just another day with him. I mean, the stuff that happened to him, it was tragedy for breakfast, treachery for lunch, corruption for tea and betrayal for dinner. But it was a heavy thing. And I was alone with him, and I told him, and I decided to ask him a question. But I was flummoxed when I asked him, and I said, "Sir, if you were in my position in this situation, what would you do?" And I blinked my eyes. He looked like he was like, he said, "I think second about my whole life, let's say. I'd really analyze everything. It'd be messed up." And, I like, all of a sudden, I looked at him and he looked scared. Like, did I hurt my son? And I blinked my eyes. I like, him scared? And I blinked my eyes, and it's all in a hundredth of a millionth of a second. And it was the stern Yogi Bhajan, Siri Singh Sahib we all know. I don't give a damn what you think. And so what was the lesson in it? Asked me a question. So 4 years later, I asked the question, and he had it saved up in the back of his mind. When I asked the question, he said, "Screw you. There's no question. You don't have any question to ask me." And the question was goofy. It was, I was in pain. And I said, "What would you do?" And instead of saying, "What should I do?" And it was a difficult response.
And for me, it was the opposite. He allowed me to ask him any question I wanted.
Exactly. It was
Just, I used to infuriate the staff because they wanted their attention or whatever. And so I'd ask him anything, whatever I felt like asking him. I didn't want to abuse the privilege, but if I had something I wanted to know, and
he would always answer it.
he'd always answer me.
To the consternation of everybody else, he would always answer it and keep going.
So talking about the afterlife, and I asked him, "Oh, where's Hitler's soul?" I said, "Where is this?" I started asking him questions, and he was happy to talk about it. On that particular point, he just looked in the air and didn't answer me. And I finally said, "What's going to happen to me after you die?" He said, "I'll be waiting for you." And I think he's going to be waiting for all of us.
Right.
So we better be able to look at him in the face without our ego, without our body, soul to soul, and tell him we did the right thing. Because we're all going to meet him on the other end.
Swear ya, 125% better than our best.
And I very rarely asked him questions, but when I did, I would couch it differently. Normally questions I'd ask him is about dealing with people. How do I deal with this guy? He's not performing well. I don't want to fire him. What should we do? Where should we move him? Things like that. And, I didn't ask him questions about spirituality so much, mostly about everyday functions, business-wise, living-wise. And I'd always say to him, "What does your intuition tell you about this, sir?" And that always got him to a place where he would answer the question differently. And that worked for me. He would always answer the question after reflecting on it for a minute. Like when he used his intuition, it would either come to him as he was talking, or sometimes he would hesitate for just a short term, and he didn't hesitate much at all. So when he did, I knew what was happening. And that's what happened at those times. I appreciated those times the most.
Like
He said-
you anonymize
Pardon?
anonymize one of those personal or business situations and then give us his advice?
He would say, let's talk about the example I gave you, where somebody who's working for me is not performing, but we don't like to just fire people because that's not our policy. He said to me, "Well, you have a sales room there too, don't you?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Move him over there. It's on commission. He'll perform." And he did, by the way.
My goodness. My goodness. Thank you.
You have a lot more questions, or we can keep telling stories, whatever you prefer.
Telling stories. I'll prod you if I have to. Although
Well-
Don was saying, I was gonna approach you afterwards, but I didn't get that exactly. When you were going for the City Sing Sab last walk in Los Angeles, I didn't understand, partly it's because you're distant from the mic, I think. You were saying that he said something about an anthem or an ant or something? What was that he said?
Oh,
Yeah.
ants. He said I can make an ant into a teacher.
Oh,
He was crying, bawling. And he says, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep. I can make an ant into a teacher. I can make an ant into a teacher. And he said it for like 2 minutes, which wasn't his style.
my goodness. So what did you get out of that? It's true, he could make an ant into a teacher. But why was
What
he
I got
satisfied?
out of it, what I got out of it was what I got every day out of him. How extraordinarily, unbelievably all-knowing he was. I would be with him and I'd realize he knew everything. And after about 2 months, I'd go listen and I say, well, he doesn't know where Elm Street is. He does, he doesn't know this or that. And then I go to class and I'd say, he knows everything again. It was a constant circle of realizing. And so when he said, I can make an ant into a teacher, it meant there's nothing he couldn't do.
Once we were walking from where he lived to Jiwan Singh had a house. We used to walk down the road there, Proust Road, not Proust Road, where I lived. And I started in my mind, like questioning him in a certain way. I said, I wonder if he knows everything about me, like my history or any of that. And I'm helping him walk down the road. I didn't say a word about it to him, of course. And he looks at me and he says, son, I've known you. And he tells me the precise amount of years and months that he knew me. Just by, I guess, reading my mind or whatever. But he answered me, he knew everything about what I was through. I used to start to talk to him about my life in different ashrams. Then he would finish the sentences. He knew all those things. It just flowed out of him. He once said at Gurdwara, he said, and he never demonstrated them because he tried it early on. He showed somebody how to levitate somebody and they messed up at the YMCA. And he never taught those kind of things, but he said he knew all the power. He had all the powers, he said, that you read about and powers you didn't read about in the books. But he never flaunted it or never even demonstrated it, or just because he was human. He was into being kind, compassionate. Guru Ramdas was his teacher.
I remember
One time we were walking in Beverly Hills and we stopped at this shop. It was a men's shop. I don't know why. Maybe it doesn't matter. We stopped at a lot of places, and we're looking at some overcoats or something. And this well-dressed black gentleman comes up to us, and Sri Singh Sahib looks at him and said, "Oh my God, Wayne, how are you?" And it was that man you were talking about that he taught to levitate. And
Yeah.
Wayne. And he was very, very respectful to that gentleman and treated him not like, I always knew when he met old students, because it would be, oh, look who it is, or oh, how are you, or oh, how's it going? It was always I knew what was coming. When I heard him go, oh, yeah, I knew it was coming. And, but he didn't do that with this gentleman. He was very respectful and courteous. And so was this man. And we spent maybe 10 or 15 minutes just the three of us. I didn't say anything for it. And it was a very nice conversation. And then we left and I asked him who it was. And then he told me who it was. But, that relationship that he had with that man endured because of what he had given him in that kind of relationship, beyond what a student and teacher would be. When you leave your teacher, he's always respectful and absolutely mannerful, and will help you if you ask him. but he will not go out of his way to help you at all. And he went out of his way to help this way. It was interesting.
That was Premka's frustration. He was
Pardon?
he was your energy, everything. But like he said, that's our 3 short stories. One quickly in New York City, he was walking with an entourage. I wasn't there. And he said, let's go in this door. He went into a skyscraper up 6 floors and walked in an office and said, you're my student for many lifetimes. It was Jiwan Singh, that face reader, incredibly
Morgan.
interesting.
The guy from Oregon.
Morgan, yeah. And it all happened that way. So that's enough on that one. Second, I went to New York with Richard Green. We traveled on to Phoenix. It was the last trips of travel. And we went to New York and we weren't sleeping for night after night after night. And it was about 3, 4 in the morning. And he had an astrologer over and he was so tired and hadn't slept for so long that while he was having him interpret the stars first, and then he would say whatever he said, he started saying where the stars were, where everything was having, without any books, any astrology, because he let it slip. He said, my best thing is faking that I know something when I know nothing. And it was just amazing. I saw him slip sometimes. The one thing he tried to do was act professional all the time, slip where he showed he knew everything. And there was another one that,
Let me say one thing, you can come back to you.
yeah, go ahead, sir. Look, this is the last one.
I remember sometimes, it didn't happen often, maybe 2, 3 times. And to this day, I don't really understand it, but we'd be sitting there, 15, 20 people in the room. And I had some very personal questions to ask him. I was not going to ask him in front of everybody. If I wanted to, I could go through the rigmarole of trying to get a private audience with him and this and that, and that happened at different times, but he just tuned into me and we started communicating back and forth mentally. I'd ask a question, very personal, intimate stuff that I wouldn't share with anyone except him. And he'd give me the answer and we'd start a dialogue. And I thought he was like talking out loud. I mean, it was just like a regular dialogue or something. I don't understand it to this day. So after 5, 10 minutes, it ended. And I asked the person next to me, did you hear all that? And they said, no, what? No, I didn't hear anything. So those are the kind of things he did. Not to demonstrate anything to show off, certainly not that, but to give me a teaching or whatever. And so I just thought I'd mention that. I mean, so many stories. I mean, we had a celebration in an adjoining city. A bunch of Indian Sikhs were there, thousands of them. He wanted us to participate. And my ego was such, I said, there was a big banner. Oh,
The transmission just went kind of warpy.
Okay, I hope it maintains.
How far back was it? How far back?
There was a gathering, something.
Yeah, and about thousands of Indian Sikhs were there.
In India? Where?
No, an adjoining city in California. I was living in LA. This is early 80s probably. And we got to the celebration and there was this huge banner, like 10 feet across, on a wooden thing. And my ego was such, I said, hey, I want to carry that. I felt pretty strong, fit. So I said, I want to carry that. So they gave me a harness. I put the thing in and I couldn't see Surya Singh Sahib. I didn't know where he was. There's thousands of Sikhs all over the place. And I'm in the head of this procession. I'm carrying this huge thing. I don't even know what it said. It was, I think, in Punjabi. And every half hour they come to me. They said, "Do you want to get relieved? We have somebody else." I said, "No, I'm going to do it." This goes on hour after hour. Finally, we finished the whole thing about 5 hours later. I undo it, and then the pain starts setting in. from carrying this thing. And it got worse the next day. And then on Tuesday, which the day he taught in LA, I could just hobbling around. I couldn't even move. I was just a wreck physically. And he starts lecturing me. I couldn't understand what he was saying. I was in pain. And I didn't get anything. I mean, I didn't understand what he was talking about. My pain was so much I couldn't do it. I could barely move. 20 years later, I walk into Guru Ram Das ashram. He died. And I start crying because give me a second. Okay, I start crying because there's nobody doing the foot washing at Guru Ram Das ashram. I was the person who always did it. But when I was with him, I'd be in the dome with him while he gave his lecture on Sunday, so I didn't do the foot washing. I was with him. And then if he came, I accompanied him onto the stage, and I sat next to him when he did come. But the last, I don't know how long, year or two, he didn't go to Guru physically. So I start crying because nobody's doing the foot washing. And so it came to me what he said to me 20 years before. He said, son, always carry the banner. And I started doing foot washing again every week.
Right.
So I just thought I'd share that with you because somehow it came to me 20 years later. I didn't hear what he said when he told it to me 20 years previous to that, but it all came to me at that moment.
Right.
So that's what we all have to do is carry the banner.
Mm.
I can tell a story. I can tell a story quickly about he could always talk. 30 people could be in the room, and he could talk to one person and tune the other 29 out so that they didn't hear what he said. And Hari Jiwan may remember, he's the only one who heard it. He may not even remember it now, but he was in a coma in and out for the last 4 days of his life. And he spoke 23 words in 17 minutes on Sunday Gurdwara. And it was a lot longer than that. It was just, but the words are translated, they're beautiful. And there's 30 people in the room. And it was, painful, but we had been through it every day. So it was our job to be with him every day to cheer him up for the last 2 years. And after he does a lecture, he sits up like it was 20 years ago. And he starts talking to me. He starts saying, nobody knows who you are. No one will ever know who you are. Blah, blah, blah. I said, sir. And he kept going on. And it went on for 5 minutes. And finally, I just was like, no. And then he threw everybody out. And Hari Jiwan said this in Iranian, somebody, did you hear what he said? I said, what? Well, I don't know. And I asked 3 other people, no one heard it. And what it was all these people that I talked to got a last teaching from him. Whether it was a year before, 10 years before, there was a last thing he said to them. And I finally realized that what it was not to get caught up in other people's opinion of you. Be who you're supposed to be. But I mean, what a beautiful thing. He sat up and put that energy out for me. It was,
Are we ready to
die a couple days later?
Are we ready to? Are you done?
I am done.
I want to say, unless you're going to bring it up before we leave about the allegations, or is that a separate topic? Or
I thought we finished with the allegations, but if you want to get back into it, go ahead. Hari Jiwan doesn't touch them, and that's maybe just a good thing to do. Go ahead.
Look, in duality, you'll never achieve divinity. Doubt is another word for duality. When you doubt something, you'll never get to your core self, who you are. I was trained never to doubt him. I'm not going to get into whether they're true or they're not true. It's a ridiculous to me conversation. He's not here to defend himself, nor should he ever have to defend himself. It's up to us to do it. And I just have trained not to judge him. I'm going towards the light. I'm not going towards doubt and duality. As I said, in duality, you'll never achieve divinity. And that's how I feel about this whole thing. You know, I think it was mismanaged by us as a and you know, spiritual body, or whatever we call ourselves, organization. And I'm not going to entertain it, because I'm not going to judge him. You know, there's individual truth, circumstantial truth, and universal truth. Most people come from individual truth. If I had to guess, I'd say 98% of people probably. And he was on such another plane of why he did things, how he did things. All I can tell you is he served everyone, even his enemies. And that's all I really need to say. So I'm not getting into the pros and cons, who's right, who's wrong, all that stuff. It's a ridiculous conversation. Whether he did things or he didn't do things, I never saw anything. And I'd be there at all hours too at the time. I never saw a thing, but I don't even want to get into it. I'm just saying, you judge him, you're judging yourself. That's how I look at it. So somebody else can talk.
I have nothing to say, but I agree with him. Just take this snippet that we've had today and juxtapose that against these allegations of 7, 8 people who are all proven mentally imbalanced. And
so be as it is, they invited me to winter solstice in 1974. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go. They made it sound like it was a vacation with palm trees and it was just going to be a beautiful thing. And I said, why not? You know, I wasn't happy where I was living, particularly. I wasn't going home to New York at the time to see my parents. So I said, okay, I'll go. So that's when I did tantric yoga, met Surya Singh Sahib. And at the end of that whole, the end of the solstice, he had people standing in line who could ask him questions. So, you know, coming from an academic background, I had my list of questions ready to go. 10 questions for him. So I start reading the questions one by one. I get through about half of the first question. He says, come over here. What's this? I said, these are my questions, sir. So he takes the sheet and he rips it up. And he just goes like that with it. So I'm, you know, like a little, you know, I didn't know what to expect. So he said, son, just move into an ashram and we'll go from there. And so I debated it. I went home. He fascinated me. I agreed with him. I didn't agree with him. I wasn't sure about him. But I knew there was something there that I needed that he had. So I wasn't happy with my roommates, and I said, okay, why don't I try ashram living? Let's give it an experiment, a little experiment. So I moved into the ashram. We had to get up for sadhana every day. Teacher, we had heads of ashrams at that time who control the energy, and he made everybody get up for sadhana. And 3 months later, he came to teach a tantric yoga course, and I think it was March. And I went through the tantric and I was blissful. It was, oh, wow, this is something special. Wow. And and then people started getting in line to give names. He was giving people names. And he was joking around, laughing. And this lady before me, he was joking with her. He gets to me. He starts screaming at me in front of 300-400 people. Mm-hmm. And I was not expecting that, you know. It just penetrated right into my core being, let's say. I was shocked because he starts telling me I'm going to have a bad life. And he said, you only get one name every incarnation. Do you want this name? And I said, I couldn't speak. I was just kind of flipped out. I didn't know what to say, but I shook my head. Yes, that's all I could do. but I was flipping out, you know. And this was really the first test, because he was testing me to see, you know, where I was at. You know, could I go through this whole thing that was upcoming for the rest of my life? And I must have, I don't know if I passed the test or whatever, but I said, yes, I want the name. So I was freaked out, and Sat Simran, who was a person who was taking care of him at the time, I had spoken to her before. She was not the easiest person to get along with, but she seemed to like me. And I said, I have to speak to him. So I said, I have to. So she said, okay, come by this evening. So I'm sitting in front of him. I said, you freaked me out, sir. What do you mean I'm going to have a bad life? And I said, He said, son, just calm down and move into the ashram and call me every month, he said. And here's my private number. So that was the blessing that came out of that experience when he gave me my name. So I would move. So then we moved, the ashram collapsed, and I moved from ashram to ashram. I went to Miami, Florida, lived with 2 people, worked 7 days a week, probably 14 hours a day, didn't get paid a cent, but called him every month to check on my progress. He told me how to get through his staff and what to say so I could get to him, because it was hard to get through to him at that time. So he would give me advice, and I'll try to speed it up because I don't want to take up all the time. But let's see. So then I moved from ashram to ashram, and finally in 1980, I moved to Los Angeles. Okay, that's where he was. So in interim, I went to different ashrams and different experiences. He got me married. I'm not going to sugarcoat things. You know, it was a very intense experience. I'm not going to play around. When he got me married the first time, I was at a tantric yoga course, and he had said, all single men and women stand up. And he started matching everybody up who stood up.
Is that the Washington course?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I don't want to get married. But he said, everybody under 30 who's single, get up, stand up. He started matching everybody up. My brother was with me at the time. He was freaking out. He didn't understand any of this. And I'm trying to sneak out of the place. I'm in the back, and I don't want to get married at that time. And I'm trying to leave the room subtly. And he looks at me in the back and says, you, come up here. And he had this woman who was very popular, attractive, smart, more or less one of the heads of the community. I'm in my jeans. I had a turban on, it didn't look like, I didn't look like much. He said, look into her eyes. I looked into her eyes. He said, good, I vouch for this. Get married. And everybody was questioning it. The head of the ashram went up to him and said, oh, there's another girl wants to marry him, which I didn't know about at the time. And he said, shut up. I vouch for this marriage. So a few months later, we get married. Anyway, I'm jumping back and forth. So back to when I moved to Los Angeles. So I'm with my wife. I met him at summer solstice, and he said, "What's your background?" I said, "I have a Jewish background." Well, no, first he said, I'm going to put you in with Guru Singh at the brass bed factory, and you're going to polish the brass bed with pig fat. That's what they use. And I said, okay, whatever you say, sir, I'll do it. And then he says to me, well, what's your background? And I say, I have a Jewish background. He looks at me, looks at my wife, and says, I'm just being blunt with you. I'm just telling you the truth. He says, fuck that. He says, go work with Hari Jiwan and Baba Singh at GRD. which was a selling enterprise. And I said, okay. And that started a long journey of working with them and being around him. He taught class twice a week, and he would be in communication. He almost saw me almost after every single class. He walked up to me, or I walked up to him, and he gave me energy. And I'm trying to figure out how to speed this up, but
That's how you got in. Was this how you-
yeah. So you wanted to know how things evolved, and then he had me doing different things and calling on me over the years, you know. But I was basically hooked into this whole thing.
Why Guru?
Well, he started out as my teacher, and he became, I guess, my surrogate father, you would say. I came from a fairly dysfunctional family. Father wasn't present in my life very much. Anyway, irrespective of that, he became my surrogate father. And over the years, he actually became my friend. So there were three things that actually occurred over the ensuing years. But beyond all that, the most important thing, he became, let's say, the altar to my own destiny. That's the way I want to put it. Okay. What did that mean? That I mean that I had the love for him. That I started out with that. But did I have the obedience to go through all the different tests? Could I do that? Did I have the endurance? And he used to refer to that as perpetual endurance. You need that on a spiritual path. That's one of the qualities that you need. So did I have the perpetual endurance? Did I have the discipline? Could I put this together? The love was already there. So that was, and I knew that if I could be obedient to him, I didn't think of it this way, but let's just say I felt I would be in God's favor, let's put it that way. Although I didn't think of it in those terms at that time. So my whole job was to be obedient to him, whatever he put me through. And he put me through so many tests, from getting married the first time, getting married again. He put me through that. The first one I'm just being very personal, so I hope people understand. I'm not trying to hide anything. My first wife ran off with another woman, so that dissolved. He tried to save it. He had Jiwan go over there. He went anyway. It dissolved.
I like her. She's a good woman.
Yeah, she was a good woman, but she broke down.
Yeah.
And so the second one went crazy. He had me marry her. She had a little daughter I adopted. And she went crazy. I was living, she just went crazy. She threw the guru out the door, ripped it up, hated the serious thing stuff. So that ended, I guess I'll go through my marriages. I don't care. The third one, I knew her. I didn't want to have anything to do with her, but he told me to marry her. So am I going to be obedient? Or am I going to say, no, sir, no, I can't do this. I can't. I'm going to do whatever he says, whatever it takes. My will was enough that I thought I could get through everything. And that lasted 6 months. She had an affair with another man, and that ended the whole thing. And then I got married for a long time after that, and she fell apart too. But it took a long time. She just didn't have the understanding. She was like, I don't mean to criticize her, but she's like a stone brain. Nothing penetrated her. And believe me, I had maybe more faults than all of them put together. I don't know, but I knew that I wanted to make things work. That I did have that desire. I don't believe in divorce, but it happened. So that's just one test. Then he put me through, he'd give me special assignments to do. And eventually, when I moved to Espanola, he put me on his security to keep me around, I think. So I did security. I was his personal security officer. So wherever he went, I followed in the car behind. I'd help him out of the car. He had trouble walking, and he had physical liabilities, disabilities. So I would help him walk from like his car to his class, help him get seated when he taught. And then he had me, I was responsible for getting food for everybody. So every day at 1 o'clock, I would bring over food. I'd go to this restaurant, I'd go to that restaurant, I'd try to figure out what people wanted. You had to deal with the staff. And that was a whole nother issue, dealing with the staff. You had to navigate that. It wasn't an easy thing. They were not, in my opinion, they were not accommodating women. There's a whole bunch of them, and they didn't like me and I didn't like them. The only thing that held the whole thing together was that I'm just trying to serve him. He was the only person that I cared about. However, I had to get through the maze of people that were trying to undermine me. I didn't give a shit. Okay. I just didn't care. I just wanted to serve him and whatever he wanted. That was my only test. So he would actually ask me to go get special food for him. They might freak out because he's on a special diet, but I didn't care. If he asked me, I'm going to do it. And so I was responsible for getting food for everybody every day. And oftentimes we go out to a restaurant, and then I didn't have to deal with that because everybody would order from the menu. So that was, and then I did security. So I did those two things with my job. So could I go, that's the underpinnings. Could I go through all the tests he's going to put me through? My love for him was always constant. That never changed. So as he became, like I said, the altar to my own destiny, I knew I had to go through everything. There was no alternative. There was no questioning him. And you to be around him, you had to be flexible, non-judgmental, and you had to be able to go with the flow, because the staff would throw roadblocks in your way, or well, he might do it too. He would test me all the time. One day, many years later, he said to me, "Oh, I heard you don't want to have to pay for all the food for everybody. You don't want to get the food anymore. And you don't want to serve me in that way anymore." Because the head person who was taking care of him, I think, planted that in his head. Somehow she just made up a story. So how am I going to respond to that? Am I going to get angry? I'm going to say, "What are you talking about? Oh, that's not true." I just smiled and I just put my arm up like that. I just went like that, like nonsense. And he totally dropped it. And that was the end of that. But I'm just telling you, every day, not every day, but a lot of days, he'd throw things at you that you had to deal with, whether they were external or something he came up with or whatever. So it was all, let's say, grist for the mill, as Baba Ram Dass used to say. Anyway, so that was my journey. It was to listen to him. Sometimes I failed. I once in a while, it didn't happen often. I would question something. I used to not like the people he had in his businesses. I said, "How could you have these people around?" And he started screaming at me. I said, "They don't know what they're doing. The people are running his businesses." So we used to fight sometimes, once in a while, but I shut up for 3-4 years and brought it up again. Sometimes, it was a real relationship, we'd laugh together, we'd cry together, sometimes you'd be in the room and he'd be yelling at you, and he's talking through you to somebody else who's also in the room, but he couldn't confront them directly. So you had to bear the brunt of that. So he'd yell at you, and you had nothing to do with it, but he wanted somebody else to hear it. So you can't judge a master. At least for me, I would never judge. I would try to never judge him. And I don't know if we want to talk about it further on, because it's another one of the questions about these allegations. So I can save that or talk about it now,
Yeah,
whichever.
let's say that for good. Let's say that for good.
And so what else do I want to say? All right, I guess that's it. And it's just when you're in the king's court, there's a lot of people trying to undermine you and get power and influence. And my whole focus was on him. What did he want? And sometimes you had to intuit what he wanted.
It was a real.
Sometimes I would just get up. He'd be upset about something. He'd get upset about a lot of things. I'd start massaging his feet. I had that relationship with him, and he allowed me to do that. So it was an ever-changing landscape of being flexible, conscious. When you walked in the room, you could feel the prana of the energy changing. That's how powerful his presence was. So I love that. That was my life. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
He was a real musketeer. He was all for the citizens. He'd live and die for him.
Point which I want to discuss with you, it is about rape. I have heard a lot of different versions, and some people have asked me a lot of questions, and I never answered that. Today I want to talk to you about it. First of all, nobody can be raped until you do not invite it. Rape is always invited, it never happens. A person who is raped is always providing subconsciously the environments and the arrangements. If you do not provide the circumstances and the arrangements, it is impossible.
me. It should be just one.
No, I'm
Hey,
on
welcome,
mine, so
everybody.
You're not gonna say, but you just let go.
We're back.
We're back
All right.
Okay.
in the Cadillac.
Somebody,
Mm.
a good friend of ours, he registered for all the sessions. He doesn't give up. I'm not going to mention him by name. He knows who he is. He has some very interesting questions. And,
Who does? Oh,
I can't hear you.
okay.
Who can't hear you?
Good, now, yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay. So anyway, so
Somebody's,
these are leading questions, but I will address one of them. He's saying that in Amritsar, there's a gallery, I think it's a Sikh museum, where the Sri Singh Sab's picture has been, and he's saying, I don't know if it's true or not, that there's a plan to take that down. What do we think about that? It's a leading question, you know? But what my perspective is that the Sri Singh Sab, the gravity of his mission and his effect won't be known for a couple of generations. So it's understandable. I mean, we're a bunch of punks. We haven't done very much. You know, if his picture goes down in Amritsar in 2020, it's perfectly understandable. But I think Sri Singh Sab was for the long term. We're for the long term, and the results won't be known for some time. It's very premature to judge his mission and his contributions. That's my humble response to that question.
okay,
As far as I'm concerned, you judge him, you're judging yourself.
Yeah.
Period.